Good to go, Mike?
Yeah, just pulling up the slides. If they'll pull up. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay, everyone can see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to talk about property management and landlord and tenant relations, which is, in my opinion, the armpits of the real estate industry. You know, it's really, there's nothing glamorous about this sector, but it's a very important sector, and it's one that we have to, you know, give respect to and pay attention to as well. So does anybody here manage into property management or interested in property management? Does anybody manage quite a few properties? And I know Hugh does. Anybody else? There we go. Hugh has our hands up. Anybody else manage a few properties or a property? Okay, so this will be, I guess, very new for a lot of you, especially if you're just kind of getting your business started. The property management, tenant relations side of things is a very good way to, you know, build your pipeline, start building your business, get out there, you know, get into activity that wouldn't necessarily, even if you make mistakes or errors, it's not very costly to the parties involved. So the good thing about tenants, let's start with the tenant relationships. The good thing about tenants, the most obvious thing is they help pay down the carrying costs of the property, right? PTMI. So property taxes, you know, your mortgage payments, your interest payments, and part of your maintenance as well. You know, the good about tenants is once they get involved, once you find them a place, they're going to be obviously paying on a carrying cost, which as a landlord, everybody loves. Another good thing about dealing with tenants, you know, a lot of them, you know, eventually do become buyers, and not every tenant is a tenant because they have to be a tenant. A lot of people are tenants by choice. So there's a lot of people that have the income and have the capacity to be able to, you know, buy a place, but for whatever reasons, maybe lifestyle, you know, they choose to become tenants. So tenants are always a good place to build your pipeline, build your list up, you know, to be able to prospect. And I know as landlords, or, you know, in terms of conversations, we get a lot of flake about tenants. There are some tenants that we do have to be wary about, and I'll discuss that, you know, as we go along. If you guys have any questions in between, just feel free to just message me in the chat, or just unmute yourself and make the comments that you want to make in regards to tenants. So that's the good about tenants. The bad about tenants, as you can see, the list is a little bit longer than what the good is. The obvious bad is, you know, non-payment of rent. So you can, you know, sometimes it's circumstances, sometimes it's deliberate. I mean, I do know that when COVID started, a lot of tenants in the beginning were under the impression that they didn't have to pay rent because of comments that the government had made. You know, which doesn't take into consideration the landlord, what kind of position that puts them in if the government is telling tenants, you know, don't worry about being evicted, don't worry about this and that and the third. You know, there used to be a time you couldn't evict tenants in the wintertime, but those laws have changed now. Another bad about tenants, you know, failure to vacate with proper notice. So proper notice being that you've served them with either an N11 form or an N12 form. You can go on the landlord and tenant board to see what those forms are and exactly what they do and how they differentiate from the other forms. But when you want to vacate a tenant, you have to use N11 or typically N12 forms. But if the tenant refuses to leave, you know, as a landlord, what do you do? Or as a real estate agent, looking to help your client, you know, set up their property so that way you can get the best and the most exposure, but then you have this person that's refusing to leave. A lot of times I find landlords are the ones trying to take advantage and not necessarily tenants. But proper notice needs to be given for you to vacate tenants. Enforcing bylaws are always a challenge, especially when you live in condos. What if you have someone who's a smoker and they're smoking and the smoke is going through the vents and it's affecting the other, it's affecting the other neighbors. How do you deal with that? So enforcing bylaws, can be very challenging, especially if, someone has a pet and the pet is a service animal of some sort, or the condo bylaws are very restrictive about the weight of the animal. Maybe they'll only let dogs in there that are only 15 pounds. And this tenant moved in 3 months into their lease. They got a dog that's 40 pounds. Like, what do you do and how do you navigate around those things? So there's no easy answers to all of this. And I don't want to go through case to case in terms of what you need to do, but just know that these are the things that when you're preparing and you're sourcing tenants, these are things you need to be mindful of and always have in the back of your mind that there's challenges that are going to come up. And even as a landlord, if you're a landlord or you represent landlords, your landlord is trying to, find the cleanest and maybe the most diplomatic way to handle certain situations. There's never really, there's no booklet of this is how you handle these situations. Each case is going to be a case to case thing. I've seen tenants tie up a transaction. If there's a sale and, the sale's supposed to close in 90 days and then 80 days before, into it. So 10 days left to closing, the tenant is, they haven't made a decision if they're going to leave yet, or maybe they haven't found a place yet that they can rent, or even worse, they've now realized, oh my goodness, they've been paying nothing for rent. They've been paying $1,400 for a 1-bedroom. And now we're giving them notice, that they have to vacate. And the market for a 1-bedroom is now $2,000. So a tenant could use that as a scenario way to decide, they don't want to leave. And then, what do you do, at that point? Excessive damage to the property. I know typically we put clauses in our contracts, to say, don't do this, don't do that, you can do this, you can't change up the floors, you can't paint the walls, you can't change the drapes. But I mean, at the end of the day, once you hand over the keys to that tenant, whatever happens from there, whatever they decide to do afterwards is really hard to navigate and to really police. And for them, they have really no liability and very little exposure. As the landlord, everything still falls on you. So I've given you quite a bit of bads that are kind of scary. And if any of you thinking of maybe potentially going into property management or being a landlord, you're probably thinking, is all this worth it? 80% of this saw in some way. Paid a tenant 1 month in advance or 1 month in addition for them to leave. So if the rent is $2,000 a month and they're supposed to be gone, let's say May is supposed to be their last month. So May's supposed to be the last month. And, so that means if May's their last month, when they moved in, they paid first and last. So they're not paying me rent for the month of May. They're going to be able to stay in the unit or the property for free in the month of May. If I need to get them out because of any of these reasons, I will typically either pay them an additional month, so I'll credit them back their April month. So May, they already have May for free. I'll credit them back April, so I'll credit them back the previous month just to make sure that they're out of there as soon as I can get them out of there, even though it's going to cost me an additional month, and I'm going to be the one to take on the costs of repairs, damages, and so forth, but it's not going to tie up my transaction. It's not going to tie up my deal. Is there any questions around that? I hope there is, because there's a lot of information that I gave with no answers. No? Okay,
Actually, I do have a question about that, Mike.
sure, go ahead.
So what happens if you go through all of this and then they decide they're still not leaving, or they're not out by the date that you're hoping for them to be out? Like what happens at that point?
Well, you'll have to go through the process of going to the landlord and tenant board. You'll have to file your proof of service. Then you'll have to serve that individual a notice, and you have to serve it the right way, which is somebody who's over the age of 18. You have to physically give it to them, or you have to send it by registered mail. Then you got to go back to the landlord and tenant board. Then you have to file an affidavit, and all these things cost money as you're doing them. Then you have to wait for a hearing. Once you get that hearing, then in the hearing they'll decide if you have grounds or not. And then there's another step that you'll have to take before a sheriff or deputy will come and enforce it and remove them, which depending on how long the hearings are. And I've had such scenarios where I have closings in 60 days, but my hearing is in 6 months.
Wow.
So what do you do in that scenario, right?
Mhm.
You have closing in 60 days, but you're hearing in 6 months. And that's why the payment is really your best option. And usually most tenants have a price, as long as you haven't been a landlord that's been taking advantage of them and, trying to like skip through the rules to save yourself as a landlord or to save your client as a seller. There's no simple answer. I've been in scenarios where we've had to pay tenants $20,000 to leave. I'm in a scenario right now we have to pay the tenant about $7,500 to leave. Again, because we don't want them to tie up the transaction and to hold up the closing. But no matter how you spin it, it's a scenario that you don't want to be in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
It's not a good answer, I know. But we live in a province where the rules are there for the benefit of the tenants, and depending on how the elections go, it could get even worse for landlords. So just know that nobody feels sorry for landlords, unfortunately, in this game, even though a lot of landlords are really just mom and pop investors, just trying to still make their way, set themselves up, set their families up, and so forth. The ugly of it. So we talked about the good, talked about the bad. So the ugly of it is, sometimes you have domestic disputes, husband and wife, partner and child, and there could be violence. And, if, police might need to get involved in, including property management and, social services, child services, and all those things. And, you have to find a way to somehow navigate through all of that, collect your rent, make sure your property or your client's property is in good order, good standing as well. And it's, all these things are very challenging to navigate in a time where, there's personal issues going on in a household. Sometimes it's not anything to do with the tenant's fault. I mean, we've had tenants in the past where CRA is doing an investigation and they freeze a tenant's account and they have no access to funds until the issue with CRA gets resolved. And at that point, you're back, a month or 2 months rent. And there's really nothing you can do as a landlord. And there's really nothing, I mean, you can serve notices and so forth, and get a hearing date with the tenant. But I mean, if their accounts are frozen, or if they haven't been paying alimony or child support, and then, they finally tap into, the government finally taps into their accounts, freezes their accounts, and they're withdrawing money, like, what do you do in that scenario, right? So a lot of things are very difficult to navigate, and there's no real easy playbook for it. And I'm bringing this up so that way you're aware of some of the things that you're going to be encountering or potentially encountering if you do decide to A, yourself become a landlord, or B, take on a role of property management, and what that looks like and how to navigate across those things. Sometimes, the substance and mental abuse. There was a tenant that we had that was a great tenant for 7 months, and then his brother died, and then he became addicted to drugs. He wasn't upkeeping the unit. there was like literally, I remember going into the unit and there was a pile of shit that filled the entire balcony from the dog just going on the balcony every single day for maybe 3 months and nobody cleaning it. And this balcony was at least 120 square feet, and half of it was covered just in dog shit. And we couldn't even find a cleaning company that would do it. Then eventually, I convinced some friends to do it for about $1,200 to just go in there and just clean up the dog poop and you know clean up the needles and everything else in there. I mean, there's stuff that happens within within this space that maybe doesn't get shared enough. And even for me, when in my experiences, all these things are less than 5% of my experiences. So I just want to just let everyone know that all these experiences that I'm speaking about are literally less than 5%. But that one time or two time these things do happen, it is a lot to deal with on top of everything else that you're managing in your life and your business and so forth. Um, Before I move on from the tenant side and I move on to the landlord side, any questions or comments? I see a bunch of wows. Wow, indeed. Yes, it is. It is worthy of a wow. Any questions? So, how do you avoid all of this? I think that's really the main thing. Avoiding all of this, 90% of it comes with tenant screening. Proper tenant screening, will allow you to catch some of these cues early. But for the previous example that I used, where you had a perfect tenant and then 6 months into it, something happened in their life and they snapped. Like there's nothing you can do to predict something like that. But I will talk about things you need to do in preparation of all of that. Now, as a landlord, what's the good about being a landlord? There's a lot of goods about being a landlord. Number one, you help to create more rental in the marketplace, because as we all know by now, we have a serious supply issue in the province, which just got worse this week because 15,000 laborers went on 15,000 laborers went on strike. And for anything new builds, construction, anything that you typically have to apply for permits for developments, you have to use unionized workers. So we have about 15,000 workers on strike right now, which means what? We're going to have more delay of products coming to the market, which is going to create inevitably more supply issues. And this problem is going to continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So landlords help to create rental supply. Tenants help cover the rental carrying costs. However, but the landlord needs to be ready to cover it in whole in the event that the tenant is not able to cover it for whatever reason. In case the tenant is not able to cover it for whatever reason. I always tell landlords you need to have a minimum of 3 months rental tucked away, or else you're going to get hurt in the long haul if you're kind of just chasing this month over month. Today's the 5th of the month, so from the 1st of the month till from the 1st of the month to the 4th of the month, I'm collecting rents. Most of my tenants are usually good, and I usually have post-dated checks. I usually have one or two that I always got to remind on the 1st of the month. For some reason, they don't remember it, but I always got to remind them to pay rent. If they don't by the 4th of the month, I'm serving N4 notices. N4 notices are notices for non-payment of rent, so I can at least get the eviction process started. And I do it very early just to let them know that I'm very serious. I'm not waiting a week. I'm not waiting a couple of weeks. I'm giving them 3 to 4 days. And because also the 1st was on a weekend, so you have to be a little bit reasonable. The weekends people are typically checked out, so by the 3rd, everybody's getting messages from me. By the 4th, notices are being served. The great thing about being a landlord, you can leverage your property as income, and you can borrow against it. So the good thing is, even when you as a landlord or as a owner, when you're going to refinance a property, pull equity out of a property, a lot of lenders don't look at just your income. They look at the rental income being produced by the properties as well. So they'll bunch that as your income. So if you're making 50,000 a year and your rental income generate $80,000 a year. So, some lenders will take the rental income plus your own income and they'll combine it as your total income to look at, what kind of affordability you're able to get and so forth. And obviously we know there's tons of tax advantages when you refinance and all these things, those events are tax free. So, as a landlord, owning real estate, owning supply, having somebody that can pay it down has multiple benefits. Obviously, you can cash flow if your down payment is big enough or the rentals are high enough, and you have market appreciation as well. And at the end of the day, no one feels sorry for you as a landlord, because to the public and to the public perception, they don't talk about all the good and the bad and the uglies about dealing with tenants. They just look at you and consider you to be rich. You're a landlord, oh, you must be rich. I remember the first time someone said that to me 10 years ago, like, oh, you must be rich. And I'm like, dude, I own one property, like, it's like, relax. But that's the perception out there, in the marketplace in terms of what landlords and tenants dynamics kind of look like. Any questions on this before I move on? Okay, so let's move on. The bad. What are the bad about landlords? A lot of amateurs, and it's a lot of properties also get managed like amateurs as well. So what does that mean? A lot of amateurs, they don't have 3 months savings to be able to carry the property in case something does go wrong. I think a lot of landlords live in la la land, thinking that, oh, this tenant will always. But as I showed, there are examples where, and sometimes it's criminal activity. There's a lot of criminal activity that happens in the city where, as a landlord, if you're operating as an amateur, a lot of things, like one thing I noticed very early on, a lot of people that don't want to be seen are going to hide in new buildings. So new buildings that are recently built typically don't have management in place, security in place. They don't have a process and a system in place. So when you have a new building that's recently constructed, you're going to have a building that typically most high rises, I'll say about 50% of them are investors. So meaning that these are individuals that are going to be landlords. Now, when you have a building come up to the market and there's 200 units available in the whole building, only 100 of them are residents and 100 of them are available for rent. Everybody, especially if they're an amateur, everybody's kind of desperate. Because they're desperate, they take shortcuts. They don't pre-qualify, they don't screen the tenants properly. And then that invites all types of, bad activity in a lot of these buildings. For those of you that are, maybe thinking of moving in new buildings or moving your clients to new buildings, keep in mind that new buildings are run by a lot of amateurs, and usually there's a lot of criminal activity in new buildings in general, simply because, again, addresses aren't registered fully yet and so forth, and that can overexpose you. Now, we deal with pre-constructions a lot, so we're always in buildings that have a lot of rental supply coming to the market at the same time. Like, what do we have coming up? I believe Elgin East, so Elgin Mills and Leslie. I think we have about 30 units there that we purchased about 4 years ago, and at least 25 of those are going to become and be turned into rentals, right? So if these conversations are not with those potential landlords, it's going to create a bad environment for everybody. And the thing about new buildings as well, or buildings that have a lot of amateurs that are managing buildings, is they keep the values of those properties down. So a lot of times when I look at properties and I look at buildings and I look at, certain buildings you look at and you're like, why is this building 3 years later the values haven't gone up. Like, this doesn't make sense. Usually it's because it's ran by a lot of amateurs, either the property management of the building or a bunch of amateurs, or the landlords themselves individually are also amateurs as well. And you'll find the buildings that are really well managed in the city. It doesn't matter what the price per square foot is. It doesn't matter, what the maintenance fee is. People will pay premium to be in a building that's well ran, well managed, and not loaded and flooded with investors, because a lot of them just simply, don't do the right type of due diligence before putting somebody up to live next door, in a community. The other bad about landlords is, you get obviously all the exposure and the liability in case of injury or someone's well-being. Not as much now, because now I'm very selective in terms of what buildings or what types of properties that I take on. But I mean, before, when I started property management, I would get call from cops. Local police will call me at least, not often, once every 3 months, once every 6 months. Something happened in the building or in the unit that I'm being managed. And you name it, from deaths, suicides, all of it, but then I realized that there's a pattern. So what I started doing is, like, even right now, there's a property in Streetsville that I'm supposed to manage, and I said no, because I realized that the landlord is an amateur. He refused to do certain things that I asked him to do, in terms of having I wanted the unit fully repaired in certain areas, and he said no, and he just wanted it to be rented out as is. Well, if you wanted to be rented out as is, there's only a certain type of tenant that's going to be attracted to a property like that. If I take that on as a property manager, I already know it's going to be more headaches for me than what it needs to be. So a property like that, I'll say no to. And sure enough, I rented this property out 8 months ago, and in 8 months later, the tenant is already out, and I have to go back to the property. And now the landlord is listening to me, and now we're doing the renovations that I asked them to do, so that way we can attract a better quality tenant. Usually, quality tenants respond to quality landlords. They go hand in hand. Usually, if there's a tenant, not all the time, it's not always true, but if there's a tenant that I find is problematic, when I look at the landlord, there's usually, those things are usually aligned. Not all the time, but a lot of times I find that to be true. That's the bad. What's the ugly? The ugly of being a landlord is you just got to have the stomach to be under attack all the time, from the media, from politicians, even what we do now. We all know technology is drastically changing the industry, which is, there could be a good and a bad to it, but just know that if you want to take on the landlord, the hardest part is just really have the stomach to just be under attack, but the payoffs are very, very tremendous. So that's the first part of today's presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a landlord and managing tenants. Before I move on to the next part of the training, are there any questions or comments?
Hey, Mike, I had a quick question. Are you going to talk about, or are you going to get into the specifics of tenant screening, like what you look for as a property manager?
Yes, my man. That's the next one.
All right, perfect.
That's the next one. So tenant screening. Noel saw the slides. He must have, because he said that right on cue. So tenant screening. The number one thing is, when you're dealing with tenants, you get a rental application. Everyone knows what a rental application is, right? Where it kind of gives you like the summary of what the tenant's background is, how much they make, do they have any vehicles, and then also what income they have and what references they have. So number one thing in terms of tenant screening is you need a rental application to kind of just, from the rental application, you just see, okay, there's the rent that I'm asking is $3,500 a month. Combined income is $70,000 a year. Is that a problem? Yes or no? Is that a problem? And anybody can jump in. $70,000 a year in income, $3,500 a month in rent. Is that a problem? not a trick question, guys. It's a simple yes or no. And you guys can type it in.
Yes.
Why is that a problem?
Well, I would consider their debt to service ratio as well, but I would assume you're looking for somebody with 100K or over income for that
Well,
amount of rent.
well, 70, that's a very good point. Thanks, Jordan. So $70,000 in gross income, $3,500 in rent. So $70,000 in gross income probably means they take home about $55,000 a year, right? So if you're taking home $55,000 a year and the rent I'm asking for is 42,000 and your take home is 55,000, that is a major problem, right? Because that means, as Jordan said, if they have debts that they have to service, that means if they have car payments that they need to make, if they have other obligations that they have, they have to do that on 13,000 income that's left over. So after they pay $3,500 to rent, and most likely when they move in there, they're probably going to pay utilities, right? They're going to pay the gas bill, the electricity bill, maybe the water bill, and they're also going to be paying the internet bill, the TV bill. They're going to be paying the TV bill, amongst other bills and expenses that they have to take on. So that is a major red flag, major, right? So it's important not to just look at what individuals gross in terms of their income. It's very important to realize, what do they actually take home. Now, the other thing that is important here, after you get their recent pay stubs and job letter, even that doesn't really tell you enough, because a recent pay stub just, actually recent pay stub will show you what they net, but the job letter will show you what they gross. Where the make or break is going to be for the tenants is going to be in the full credit report. So don't send me a screenshot of your Credit Karma score. Like I can't do anything with that. I don't even care to see your screenshot of your Equifax score or your TransUnion score. Those things mean absolutely nothing to me. What I care about seeing when I get a full credit report is I want to see how much debt they're carrying. I want to see what the balances of those debts are. So I want to see how many credit cards does this person have? How many lines of credit does this person have open? Then I'm looking at, okay, if you have a $20,000 line of credit and you have a $15,000 utilization, that's a 75% credit utilization. That is very high. That's somebody who's very dependent on credit, right? And if they have $20,000 line of credit and their car goes next month, I mean, a car, to fix a car, it could be $1,200. That means they're pretty much maxed out on their credit cards, their lines of credit, regardless of how good their credit score is. So I don't care how good their credit score is. I want to see what their utilization is of credit. Ideally, I like to have that utilization number at 30%, max 50%. So if they have a balance of 10,000 and their credit card is 20,000, that is still high, but I'm okay to consider that with other things as well. Now, are there scenarios where, I'll look at someone's credit score? I mean, I've had tenants in the past, I look at a credit score lower than 600, like 540. Utilization, utilization is very, very high. And I'll still put them on as a good tenant, but I only do that for single moms. Single moms will do anything and everything to make sure they don't lose the roof over their heads. And if shit does hit the fan, usually with single moms, they'll find a way to make it happen, or they'll pack up and they'll leave with no problems. So I even if I have two individuals, so if I have two individuals, let's say two friends, let's say Paul and Jordan. So Paul and Jordan, they come to me, hey, Mike, here's our full credit report. Here's our full credit report, great credit score, we make great income. We want to rent your place for $3,500 a month. Everything checks out, boom, 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 boom. I'll say no to Paul and Jordan. Why? Because they're two single guys, assuming that they're single guys. I'm assuming that there's two single guys living together. they're not really committed to each other. If something happens, one gets in a relationship, they'll want to leave, or one has a partner, something happens, they're going to want to leave and they're going to want to terminate that lease. So I can look at people that have two parties that are applying together, and if they haven't been together for long and there's not much tying them together, even if they have the most perfect profile, I'll say no to it, because I just won't. I'd rather take on the single mom because I know what I'm going to get with her, versus the two single guys that are overconfident. And I typically do that even for girls. Two single girls, not really committed to each other, and they want to get a space with me. I typically would say no, unless they're committed to each other, they're married, common law, something along those lines that are tying them together. Then I would consider it. Now, when you deal also with individuals that are entrepreneurs and business owners typically have terrible credit scores. So a full credit report from a business owner is not something I'm usually interested in. Because I know, when you run a business, you run it till like, till to the nail, before you kind of give up on it. So I understand that. So for business owners, maybe I want to see bank statements. I want to see what kind of cash flow comes into the business. I want to see NOAs. I want to see, okay, how are you filing? What are you filing? Because a business owner might show me, might on their job letter might say they only make $30,000 a year, but their business brings in, like I have a friend like that. His company makes about $1.2 million a year, but he only shows income of about $25,000 a year, right? So for someone like that, I wouldn't say no to them because their credit report or their income statement doesn't look appealing. Someone who makes a lot of bread and has a lot of cash, I'm always open to that kind of conversation. Now, there's another thing that you'll usually get from tenants that it's not necessarily a red flag, but it's something that should probe you to ask more questions. When somebody wants to pay a year up front, 6 months up front, that can be a very dangerous thing, because they could be trying to hide something, and that's why they want to give 6 months up front. Or maybe they just maybe they just got their quarterly bonus for Q1, so they're comfortable paying 1 year up front. But you have to deal with them over the next few months, maybe years, and they won't be paying you a year up front in year 2. So what's that payment going to look like in year 2? Is it going to be month to month? Is it going to be deposits? Is it going to be checks? You need to have those conversations with those individuals. The only scenarios in terms of which I've accepted full cash payments is when I deal with internationals. Because internationals, when they come, they have no credit report, they have nothing that they can show, but they have cash and they're willing to pay a year up front. And I'll talk to the person who's putting them up. What's your relationship with this person? How do you know this person? Are you friends with this person? Or they just walked into your office and they said they wanted a rental. So I'll do some of my screening through the agent that's bringing this person forward to me. But those are some of the things and cues that you should look out for that will help you with your screening. Now, is this foolproof? Of course not. There's always things that can, you can mix up and that can be missed. I mean, I had a tenant one time that profile was, and I was representing the tenant, and I put him and his girlfriend in a condo. And then in a span of a year, because I was following him on Instagram as well, this guy got 2 pit bulls, 2 cats, a squirrel. He had a squirrel on a leash. I don't know how he did it, but he had a pet squirrel, and he had a black pig and a pink pig all living in a 1+ den. And I was in shock. And when the agent called me, and the landlord called me, they were furious with me. And I just explained to them, look, I did all the things in terms of screening. I went through all the things, but one thing I didn't realize with them, and this is like maybe my first month as a realtor, but they were professional tenants. Like, they knew the rules, they knew how to finesse the agent so that way they can hide. They knew certain things I wasn't aware of, and I was a little bit naive. So like they literally moved into this 1+ den with a whole farm that they didn't have before. And he had a pink pig, a black pig, and these pigs, the time I saw them, they were huge. Two cats, 2 pit bulls, and a squirrel. And they would walk around Liberty Village with their farms. And I used to see it on Instagram and I couldn't believe it. You really ain't selling this idea of being a landlord. No, I'm not here to sell the idea of being a landlord. I'm giving you the worst case scenarios of things that can happen when you are an amateur as a landlord. So this is, but like I said in the beginning of this is maybe 5% of the experiences. Sorry guys, give me one sec. Yeah, this is maybe 5% of the experiences, or maybe even less than 5% of the experiences that you will go through. And this is really to prepare you, to let you know that there's a lot of people out there that, man, there's a lot of people out there that are just really good and they're just really smart. Another thing you should be doing if you're representing a tenant and you're going into a place, always do a title check on the landlord. Unless they have a property management company in place or something like that, always do a title check on the landlord to see who's the actual landlord. Because I remember a few years ago, there was a gentleman that was posing as a landlord. So I think either he had access to buildings. So he would go to a building posing as a landlord, and he would collect first and last month rent from 20 to 30 different people posing as a landlord, and then they'll take off. And then when moving date comes, 20 people will show up at the door, and the landlord will be there saying, like, I lease this property to only one person. Who are these other 19 people? Then 19 people will say, I have a lease agreement here. Here's my lease agreement. And I gave a deposit for first and last month. And the agent will say, well, I'm the agent. I'm the only agent. I don't know what you're talking about. So also be very wary when you find ads on Facebook, Kijiji, and these kind of things, because there's a lot of activity that happens in the city. Usually in new buildings, because that's usually where people can get away with all types of craziness and all types of madness. But this space of being a landlord is very rewarding. But you have a lot of people that are great finessers out there that usually, that they know what they're doing. They know that the law protects them, and they know how to game it to their advantage. So when you're taking on this responsibility of A, being a landlord, and B, being a property manager, these are the things that your radar needs to be fired off at all times, right? Because if as a property manager, if things go wrong, that landlord is blaming you because you're the property manager. You're the one that they've hired to take on this role. So this is on you. You should be aware of those things. Noel said there are a lot of fake landlords in ICE condos. He would rent out Airbnbs and show them as if they were his property. This was a huge story. The fake landlord was operating on Kijiji and Facebook. You see, I wasn't even aware of that story. But again, that's typically where they would hide, right? In Kijiji and in Facebook Marketplace. This property was at 2200 Lakeshore and Park Lawn. That's where that happened. And I actually knew the person who ran the scam, and then he just disappeared, took off, left the country, and boom, gone. So be very aware. This is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the purpose of this is to have a real conversation, because a lot of you guys in the beginning are going to be representing tenants, right? In the beginning, you're going to be representing tenants, and then eventually you'll start representing more landlords. And if you do take on representing landlords and managing the landlord's property, this is why, in terms of what I charge, actually, no, I'll come to that later on. So tenant vacating, because I went through the good, the bad, and the ugly for the tenants. So how do you get the tenants out? I know that's probably the cliffhanger I left everybody with, because I didn't really tell you guys how to solve any of those problems earlier on. Number one way, you start at the screening. Rental application, full credit report, have a conversation with the agent that's representing the other side. If you need to do an interview, with the tenants. Usually if I'm like on the fence about a tenant and I say, hey, you know what? Let's do an interview. Put your tenants on Zoom and let me just have a quick conversation. The ones that want to, that don't want to be seen, they usually don't show up on the Zoom on the Zoom meeting. They find a reason or an excuse, or they found something else, or they're no longer interested. And right away, do a Zoom meeting with the tenants to kind of see who they are, what their profile is. Even me, I'll go to, let's say a tenant gives the first and last month to the brokerage. I'm representing the landlord. But tenant gives the first and last month to us, the brokerage, and I'm supposed to do a key exchange, let's say today, and I go today, and something is I just have a feeling that something is off. I've had a time where I went to give a tenant a key, and a tenant said something to me, and I decided that day, right then and there, to terminate the lease. I said, no, you're not getting these keys. I realized that they were a professional tenant, because there was something that they said. I can't remember what exactly that they said, but it just signaled something to me. And I called the brokerage and I said, I'm terminating this, and I'm returning the deposit, and I'm putting it back on the market. So screening is everything. And until you give them the keys, to me, there's no lease in place. They can fight it, argue it. The broker of record from their office can call my broker of record to try to get me in trouble. They can call Rico, do whatever they want. The last thing I'm doing, the last line of defense you have, is to give the keys away to a tenant, because once they have the keys in their hands, it's all over. Now, assuming you have a perfect tenant and they stay 1 year, no problems, should you do a lease renewal or a month-to-month? I always like to opt to do a month-to-month, because with a month-to-month, there's less rights that the tenant has. That way, if I need to vacate them right away, I can do it within 60 days, as long as I have grounds within the lines and within the rules that are allowed by the landlord and tenant board. Now, obviously, most landlords will lie to say their mom is moving in, or they want to do a sell, look, whatever you need to do, or whatever your clients need to do, that's on them and that's on you. What I usually prefer is to just keep the tenant on a month-to-month, and then that way, I think 80% of my tenants right now are all on a month-to-month. So I did not renew the lease. Now there is no termination date at the end of the lease. Yes, so because there's no termination date at the end of the lease, it's a month-to-month tenant, but I can vacate them within 60 days. Versus if I sign a new lease with them for 1 year, 6 months into the 1 year, if I decide that I want to sell it, I can't sell it because their lease has precedent over my need to sell it. Even if I want to move into it, as long as a tenant has a lease, they have the rights within that lease, regardless of anything else going on. Just make sure that, there's a lot of landlords that don't check into properties. And that was me. When I started off, I had a property for 3 years. I never saw what it looked like. I never visited it. Didn't know anything about the tenants, because I had a property management company that I had hired, and they were handling everything for me. But, it's important to go check in just to kind of see and get a pulse of what's going on with the property, with the tenant, what's going on with their lifestyle. Maybe your lease said no pets, and now they have the whole animal farm and the, living up in the condo or in the property. Like, the only way I found out about that tenant previously was because I just happened to follow them on Instagram. And that's the only way that I found out about the animal farm. All the types of forms that you need for all types of different scenarios. you can find on the tribunals, Tribunals Ontario, .ca/LTB/forms. If you just Google Landlord Tenant Board Ontario, it'll take you to this page and you'll see all the forms that you need. The common forms are N4 for non-payment, N11 is a voluntary end to a lease. Okay, so if a tenant is under contract and they sign an N11, it means that they're voluntarily ending the lease. Now, a lot of landlords try to finesse and they try to sneak this N11 form thinking that people don't read it, but I mean, these forms are 2 pages, so everybody reads it. And they'll clearly see that you're trying to one-up them and, or try to pull something quick on them. N12 is the notice that you will give once the lease is ended and you're looking to do a sale or you're looking to move in personally. After a lease is done, then an N12 form is used. Those are the 3 popular forms that I use. And when all fails, pay the tenant to leave. I think I've said that quite a few times. Before I move on in the tenant screening and vacating, is there any questions? Noel, I don't know if you had questions or if any thoughts that you had might have been answered, or anybody else want to make any comments?
I have a quick question. Might be a silly one, but I have agents who have given me trouble with like a specific type of credit reporting company. So do you have a preference between Equifax or TransUnion? Is one more credible than the other?
I use Equifax just because it's more known. In Canada, there's only 2. In the US, there's 3. So there's TransUnion and Equifax that everybody knows. In the US, they also use Experian. Experian is the most advanced of all the 3 systems, but it's not very popular. Actually, I don't think it really exists in Canada. TransUnion, all of them put different weight on different things. So some, if you have a mortgage, that will bump your score really well. I think TransUnion, like if you carry a mortgage, like your score is going to be through the roof. But you'll find that the scores are not consistent across TransUnion and across Equifax. So I use Equifax because it's what I know. It's the simplest one for me to understand. But I won't shy away if somebody sends me a TransUnion report either.
Right. Now, my next question is, let's say you're looking at a tenant, their credit score, their credit report, sorry, and they screen captured it. Like obviously not just the credit score, but the accounts.
I don't take it. I don't take it. Unless like if everything else kind of matches up, like they make, $250,000 a year household income, and their credit report is at 800. Like I wouldn't, but I always let the agent know before they submit the documents to me that I want a full report. I don't want
right.
just
That's what I'm saying. Let's say
screenshot.
they give you the full report, but they just screen captured it off of their phone, like the score and the accounts and the amounts owing. That's fine.
Yeah. As long as it's the full report, and Hugh made a comment to match the job and the address of the bureau with the app. So people can edit these full reports now. Like I recently found out that people can edit their full reports. Another way to really hone down on the full reports once you get it is just look for inconsistencies. So like on my report, for example, there's an inconsistency with my job and my place of and my home address. So even like the place that I'm living in right now, I rent. So when I was preparing my full report and everything else, I wrote an email to the agent and I said, hey, look, there's an inconsistency here with my driver's license address with my credit report address. Here's the reason why, the reason for the inconsistency, right? So that's another thing. Match the credit report with the driver's license. See if those things add up. Say, hey, this says you live here. The driver's license says you live in Quebec. Like, what's going on? Quebec is always a red flag for me too. I discriminate against Quebec. They're just
Yep.
If you know, you know. If you know, I don't need to kind of beat on it. Quebec is just I don't deal with Quebec renters in general. It's just a no for me.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry?
I said thank you, thank you.
Oh, no problem. So let's get into a little bit of the fun part. Now that I've scared, everybody from wanting to be a landlord and a property manager. Okay, let's talk about the fun part. So I have a property management document that I literally just Googled. I think Isaac might have had one many years ago. And I just took a little bit from each, and I just created a very simple 2-page document for property management. I charge no less today than $200 to manage a property, which is, people will tell me it's a lot, because the average property management company, I think, charges about 5%. So if you have a lease that's $2,000 a month, the average property management company will charge you $100 a month. I charge $200 a month. I charge $200 a month, because I hate property management. So if I have to do it, it's going to be worth my while. And B, I just know that all it takes is one incident, and that $200 a month is a wash, because now I got to spend hours back and forth doing service, or I gotta be on the phone with the utility company and the appliance company because the dishwasher now doesn't work, and blah 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 blah. I gotta go to landlord and tenant board. I gotta go for hearings. Just that one trip alone is not even worth the time to do it. I do it simply because it's because I service a lot of investors, and I service a lot of people that also don't live in the country. They're Canadian, but they make their money outside of the country. So because I hate doing it so much, I make sure that I charge quite a bit to do it. So I charge an average of, the minimum I charge is $150, and that's if I really love you, and you've done a lot of business with me in the past. So I'm just like, you know what, whatever, let me $150 a month, let's make it happen. Your property management document should have a start and end date, should have the term, should have the duration, should specify things that you will do and you will not do. That's very important. It needs to state the things that you will do and you will not do. Now, most of the properties that I manage, I always tell the tenants, if there's an issue, especially if it's a 911 issue, and it's an issue that's less than $200. So if it's a 911 issue, reach out to me right away. If it's an issue that's less than $200, you action it, you find a plumber, you find a contractor, get the invoice, send it to me, and I'll square it up by the next month. But I will not be on the phone calling plumbers, calling appliance people, checking warranties. I'm just not going to do that. So I set that expectation with the tenants and with the landlord. And also in my documents, it's very clear what I do and what I will not do. Also know that, your main role is to complete forms, serve notices, and file those forms accordingly. You're a glorified babysitter, but it's a great way to make, some passive income in the meanwhile. Like if you set a goal for yourself, to make $10,000 a month in passive income, you need about 60 properties that you manage, which is a lot of properties, right? Or if you have one investor that has 10 doors, you're 20% there. We have one investor that has 10 doors that that they want you to manage. That's 1/5 of your way there. So my property management business is not something I promote. As I mentioned, I literally hate doing property management. But I have to do it because it's very important for the clients that I service. But at the same time, if it means I can drive a free car, and make sure my basic expenses get covered through, the passive income generated over this. Think about, especially investors, they'll keep these properties for a long period of time. And, at $150 a month or $200 a month, even 5 of those, you're looking at $1,000 passive that can come in while you're still building your business, while you're still grinding, building your pipeline. At least, every month something is coming in and you're generating some type of income. So yes, so this is my management document, as I mentioned, exclusive rights to manage. At the end of the lease, I have the right to set it up again for a lease renewal. Get paid twice if the lease is renewed, how I'm compensated, if there's a fee for which the fee will be, the placement fee is like what you get paid as a realtor for placing that tenant in. What I have the authority to do. So things are listed, what my responsibilities are, very, very clear. Sorry, I think I might have froze there. What my responsibilities are, everything is very, very clear. I have them sign, I have myself sign. So very, very simple document, nothing amazing about it. I can Google these to kind of find, what suits and what you're looking, it is a very easy way to manage, to create some passive cash flow while you're building your primary business as well. So that is it. That is it for today. Property management and landlord tenant relations. As depressing as it started, I definitely encourage everybody to take on some of it and familiarize yourself with the process, familiarize yourself with the documents as well. And that's that. Any questions? Okay, all right. So no questions means either it was really good or you guys are just like tired and bored and you guys are all checked out. So the last thing that I want to mention is if you haven't RSVP to Natasha about Monday, please do so like right now. Reply to the email. So Monday it's gonna be our first official like team team event, meet and greet. I would say dress business cash, whatever that means for you. So dress business cash. It's going to be at the Dream Suites, which is right next to the airport. We're going to have food. We're going to have drinks. We're not going to have a lot of talking, so which is good. It's really just to hang out and meet the team. Isaac Jr. will have a few words to share as well. And then there's some administrative things that Natasha will probably discuss. And, there's a couple of awards that we still need to present and to give out as well. So please go RSVP. Other than that, book your one-on-ones. If you guys want one-on-ones, book it so we can get some one-on-ones done to take a look at your businesses and to see what is, what types of actions and activity we can do. That is it. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Natasha, if you're there, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to share.
I'm here. I think you covered everything. We're excited to see everybody on Monday.
Okay.
If you haven't RSVP'd yet, please do so we can know exact numbers. And yeah, that's it. That's all.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
you.
I'm heading to the office right now. Natasha, so I'll see you soon.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right.